Factoring is the process of rewriting a polynomial as a product, right? When we factor, we're writing it as a product of two or more. So that's where we're getting this. Before we were multiplying those, right? So now we're going to go the opposite. A factor means multiply, is any constant or variable that when multiplied form a product, right? Because when we multiply two factors, we get a product. Okay, so we're going to start slow today. We're going to start by listing our factors. Now, when we do this, I want you to really think about starting with 1, going to 2, going to 3. Like, go in order, because then you're going to be able to see exactly when you've listed them all, okay? So 1 times 32, and then we're going to try 2. Does 2 go into 32? Yes. How many? 16. Does 3? No. Does 4? Yes. 4 times 8. 5 doesn't, 6 doesn't, 7 doesn't, and now we already have 8 listed, so we know we have listed all of them. When we have negatives, one of them is going to end up being negative. So tell me, what would be my factors here?
1, -9.
1 and -9.
6 times 2. 2 times 6.
3 and -3. Okay, or you could even flip-flop. You could say -1 and +9. For our purposes, what we're doing when it's negative, as long as you know that one of them is going to be negative, you don't have to write both of those out. Okay? Oh, now we have a letter. What are the factors of 3? 1 and 3, and then I'm going to have my x on the end. Like when we were looking for, like if we have multiple letters going on. And then x squared is just x times x. The greatest common factor, the GCF of polynomial, is the greatest monomial. How many terms in a monomial?
1.
1 term. That divides into each term. The key is evenly. We're not going to be dealing with any decimals or fractions here. Determine the GCF for the polynomial at the right. Okay, write each term in expanded form. Well, how do we write 3x squared? Can we write 3? If we're going to write it out, this is kind of like what we did it with our exponents, 3 times x times x. And how do I write 6?
6 times x.
2 times 3 times x. So I want you to see, I'm just going to draw a line in between here. I want you to see it says highlight or circle the GCF. So what does each side have in common? 3 and an x. So a GCF can be a number, it can be a letter, or it can be a combination of it. So what was our GCF for this? 3x. Okay? Doesn't always have to be a combination. It could just be one or the other. All right. So let's write a couple of steps on what we need to do here. Look at the coefficients. Do you remember what a coefficient is? Coefficient is the big number, right? It's the number in front of the letter or the variable. Okay? Which is the largest number that divides evenly into the term? Okay, so we're going to come over here for a minute. We're going to list our factors of 12. We're going to list our factors of 36, right? So 1 times 12. What else goes into 12? 2 and 6. Anything else? 3 and 4. And because we went down 1, 2, 3, and then we got 4 on this side, we know we're done. Because it kind of makes a U shape, right? What about 36? What makes 36? 1 and 36. 2 and 3 and
3 and 12.
4 and
4 and
9. 5 doesn't work. 6 doesn't work. 6 does work. 6 and 6. 7 doesn't work. 8 doesn't work. And now I'm back to 9. So I'm finished. Don't forget the letters though, because we also have x and x for x squared and x. So when we're looking for this largest coefficient, okay, what's the largest number that is in both 12 and 36? 12.
6.
Okay, they do both have 6's, but 12 is bigger. So 12 is going to be our coefficient. And then we also need to look at our variables. Which variable do they have in common? Just x. Okay, so our GCF for 12x squared plus 36x is just 12x. That's our GCF. I do want you to be aware that when we're looking at those variables, I'm going to put a little star here. It's always going to be, if all of your terms have that same letter, it's going to be our lowest exponent. Okay, whatever the lowest exponent, if they all have that same letter, that's going to be part of your GCF. Okay? Remember, it can be a GCF, can be a number, a letter, or a combo of both numbers and letters. Okay? Sometimes you can look at your numbers. You don't need to make that list, that little T-chart. And you can be like, oh, I know what the GCF is. So do you know what the GCF of 45 and 9 is? It's 9. And then, look, we both have x's. What's our lowest exponent? Just x. So our GCF here is 9x. When we look at number 3, just because I'm going up and down, is there a GCF with those numbers? Keynote, 1 is not a GCF because 1 goes into everything. Is there a GCF between 2 and 4 and 7? No. Do they all have x's on them? No. So this one there is no GCF. There's nothing they have in common besides 1. So there's not a GCF here. They don't have anything else in common. Looking at number 2, what do we think here? 4, okay? And x. Now, we can write 4x. I want you to be aware these are both negative. So technically, you could also write a negative 4x, okay? It just kind of depends. I would take both answers because technically they're both right, okay? What about this last one? 5 and 20 and negative 10. 5, is there a letter? No, they don't all have the B on them. So in this case, it's just the number 5. So a polynomial with a GCF can be factored by dividing. Okay? I want you to remember, so when we do distributive property, like if I have 3x times 2x minus 4, okay, we are multiplying here, right? So we would get 6x squared minus 12x. When we are taking out a GCF, we're doing the opposite, okay? Now we're dividing. That's what this is looking at. So in order to do that, we have to find that GCF. Okay, so looking at 15x squared and 5x, what do they have in common? What would be our GCF? 5 what? 5x. So essentially what I'm going to do, that 5x is going to go outside my parentheses. Right? That would be the number we would normally distribute. And in order to find the inside, now we're dividing instead of multiplying. So 5x squared divided by 5x is 3x.
Plus 1.
And then 5x divided by 5x is 1. So it's the opposite of what we were doing when we were distributing. Write the GCF on the left side, or you can write it as division. But it does have to go outside the parentheses, and then we're going to divide to get the inside. They have a graphic organizer here with the box. If you don't like that, don't feel like you need to use it. It's just kind of an organization tool if you do need it. So looking at this, start with the GCF. What's a GCF between 32 and 12? And it needs, stands for greatest. So it needs to be the biggest number they have in common. And if you're not really sure what that number is, then make your T-chart so you can see it. Okay, 4 is the biggest number that we have in common. Do they have any letters in common?
X.
4 and X. So when we write that 4X has to go outside the parentheses because you got to know what you're taking out so that if we multiply it to double check it, we can plug it back in. So now we're dividing. Well, what's 32 divided by 4? 8, and then we have the X. This is just exponent rules like we did in the last unit. And 12X divided by 4X is a positive 3. If I was to go through and double check that and I was to distribute, I would get 32X squared plus 12X. They match. Sometimes, again, it's only a number. What number does this have in common? This has 8 in common. If it helps you to write it as dividing by 8, you can. Or you can use that graphic organizer. 8 divided by 8 is?
R squared.
Just R squared. You could put the 1 if you wanted. Negative 40 divided by 8 is?
5R.
Negative 5. Don't forget that letter. And negative 16 divided by 8 is negative 2.
I have a question.
So on this first one, the GCF is 6 what? 6X. You could technically use a negative 6 as well. You don't see that very often, but it's not technically wrong. 6X into negative 6X is a negative 1. Make sure you're very careful with that sign. And then 6X into 12X is a positive 2X. Sometimes you'll see it written like that. Sometimes they'll also write with the X first. These are the same thing. You just have to make sure that your sign stays with the right number. 36 and 64 and 8. We really want it to be 8, but it's actually 4. And there isn't a letter because they don't all have H's. So 4, make sure you're writing that number, that GCF outside. 9H squared
Plus 16H.
plus 16H plus 2.
Why wouldn't it be 8?
Because 8 came from.
Find the perimeter and then factor it. Well, how do we find perimeter? We're going to add up all the sides. So this goes back to that whole collecting like terms. So 5 plus 4 plus 1 is 10x. And then we have our regular numbers, our constant plus 5. So that's our perimeter. And then what's the GCF now? 5. So you're technically dividing this by 5, right? If you can do it in your head without writing that divide 5, that's fine. So we get 2x plus 1. This is going to be your factor. This was your perimeter. On 10, can you identify his mistake? Remember when we do this, guys, do your own work and then look at what they did, because otherwise if you're looking at what they did, it kind of confuses you. What is the GCF between 9 and 36? 9. Is there a letter?
Yes.
9x. So when I divide this by 9x, I am left with what?
X minus 4.
X plus 4 minus 4.
X minus 4. So what was his mistake? Right. 3x is a common factor, but it is not the greatest common factor. Okay, because if you're looking at 3 and 12, we could take out another 3. Last one, right? No, we're not going to do that. So we're done.